Hello and welcome to Louise Singleton Creations. In one of my recent videos, I made this donut-shaped resin and pebble table, and I really loved it, and it had many uses. It could have a plant pot in the middle, or floating candles, or even a bowl full of snacks. But one of my favourite options was to have a water feature in the middle. So I tried it out with my solar fountain and it looked really good, especially with the stones which matched the table. But the water was going too far out of the bowl and it was really losing water. And so I had to have a rethink on that idea, because I did love the idea of sitting on my patio with a drink and having a little water feature on the table right next to me. I thought it was really good. So yeah, today's video is my plan B for my water feature in the middle of my table. If you want to find out more, stay tuned and enjoy the video. My plan for my water feature was to use my big sphere mould and have a pipe going up through the middle so that I had a spherical water feature, and I decided to make it with Aqua Cast. I wanted to make it look like stone, and the colours, I wanted them to match the pebbles on the table so that it would all go together really well. So that was the plan anyway. So this is the silicone sphere mould I'm using in today's video, and it's from Devon Dotting. It's around 10 to 11 centimetres in diameter. I also have some clear plastic tubing which I had in my box of bits and bobs. I will put the dimensions on the screen because I'm not exactly sure, but it fitted my water fountain perfectly. It was the same water fountain that you saw that I used originally. I've just taken the fountain part off and that tube fits onto that nicely. Because the tubing comes in a roll, it's bent and it's going to be hard to just straighten it to put it in. So I had to put something in the middle to straighten it. And I have a lot of coffee stirring sticks. And so I packed it full with those sticks until it was straight. And to try to avoid the Aqua Cast going up inside the tubing, I took a piece of duct tape and just blocked the end. I stuck it on and trimmed around the edge, and that way I kind of avoided having the Aqua Cast going up inside. I also used my coffee stirring sticks to create this frame to make sure I could keep the tubing in position once the Aqua Cast was in. So that fits perfectly, and so we're ready to mix the Aqua Cast. Aqua Cast is an environmentally friendly eco resin, and it's a fusion of powder and polymer which only needs the addition of water to make beautiful, strong and robust homeware. It's from Elichem Resins, and I will put the link and the discount code in the video description. But if you can't access something like this, you can always use cement. That would work really well too. But obviously, you're not going to get the same effect. You can't colour it in the same way. But if you just wanted a solid, flat colour, you could use cement. So I've weighed 320 grams of water, and now it's time to add the powder, and I'm adding 890 grams. Once it was all weighed, I gave it a really good stir. Now, I was going to be putting it into smaller cups because I'm using a few different shades of colour. So I didn't stir it too much in this big jug because it's easier in smaller cups. You can get rid of the lumps by pressing it against the sides of the smaller cups. So when you see me pour it out of this big jug, you will see that there are some lumps in there still. Right, to colour my Aqua Cast, I sometimes like to use Jesmonite pigments. It's not the only pigment you can use. You can use mica powders, but you need a lot. or there's all kinds of different pigments, even acrylic paint you can use. And the, let me think, Resi Tint from Elichem Resins, that works well. But if you want a really strong colour, Jesmonite pigments do work really well. However, I don't have very many to choose from, but I did have a little bottle of terracotta coloured Jesmonite pigment, and that's what I decided to use. So yeah, I decided I wanted some very pale in one of the cups, then a little bit darker, and then as dark as I could get it. And I'm going to put them all three together in one jug. And I've left some white in the big jug, so I'll have some white in there too. Once I had my three colours mixed, I poured them all in, one after the other, alternating them a little bit so that I had a pile of different colours in there and I didn't mix them. And that way, when I poured them into the mould, I would get a really interesting pattern forming. So then it was time to pour the Aqua Cast into the mould. I had to centre the tube before pouring to make sure I had it right in the middle, and I held it in position and just gradually poured in the Aqua Cast. And as it's pouring in, you can see the different colours mingling together, and you can imagine what lovely patterns will be forming inside that mould. I wanted to make it look as natural as possible, and when you look at pebbles you can often see those layers of colour in there, so that's what I was trying to achieve. Once I'd poured in most of my Aqua Cast, I put the frame on to hold the tube in the middle, and then I had both hands free again so I could scrape out the rest of the Aqua Cast from the jug. It would be useful to have an extra pair of hands sometimes, but hey ho, you manage, don't you? I used the Aqua Cast calculator to work out how much Aqua Cast I needed, and that calculator is on the Elichem website, and it's really good. The only trouble is it tells you exactly how much you need to fill your mould, and it doesn't take into account the fact that there will be some left on the sides of your vessels that you're using to mix with. And so it's always best to make a little bit extra. And I forgot to do that. So I didn't quite have enough to go right up to the top, but it was fine. And once it was all filled, I gave the table a good bash, and that helped any stray bubbles to rise to the top so that I would have a smooth finish. Then I left it secure for around 2 hours, and it was time to take it out of the mould. Right then, before taking it out of the mould, I took the frame off and we were ready. I like to use a tin underneath, like a tin of beans or something. I think that was a tin of soup actually. I like to put a tin underneath and press down on the sides. And I love this mould, but I've got to say it's really hard to get things out of it. And I pushed and I pushed, and I just could not get it out of the mould. So I called on my husband. Luckily he was off work that day, and that extra pair of hands really helped. Right, so first of all, it was quite pale, but once it gets sealed, you'll see the colours really show up a lot better. But hopefully you can see at this stage how lovely the effect is, and it does look quite stone-like. Well, I think it does anyway. It really does remind me of the pebbles which I used in the table. So anyway, the hole at one end was a little bit covered up, but not really a problem. It was such a thin layer, I could just poke it through. And so because I wanted to do a little bit of sanding, I took the tube out for now. I poked through that hole at the top, and then I coiled up some sandpaper around a stick and just sanded down the middle to make it nice and smooth. And I also sanded the bottom. I pushed the tube back into position, and then I started spraying it with my HydroFlow sealer. I just sprayed it on and rubbed it in with my gloved hands. And if you're making something to go outside, that's fine. Aqua Cast can go outside, but you will need 4 or 5 coats of this sealer, and leave it about an hour in between each coat to make it really water resistant. My original plan was to demonstrate that this can be water resistant, but I chickened out a little bit. I thought about the fact that it's going to have moving water going over it and it's going to be sitting in water all the time. And I was just a little bit nervous about whether it would last underneath moving water all of its life. I just thought it would erode over time and I didn't want it to. So yeah, Aqua Cast can be used outside for ornaments and planters and things, but moving water made me a little bit nervous, and so I did decide to coat it with resin after that layer of sealer had dried. And the idea was to put it onto my cup turner to get a really smooth finish without drips, because I was worried that if I just coated it with resin, it would just all drip down and it wouldn't be an even finish. So yeah, I decided to put it on my cup turner. It didn't work out perfectly, but you'll see in the end, it did work. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself now. I'm just stuffing some more of the coffee stirring sticks into the tube, first of all. And then I need to make sure it fits inside the tube of the cup turner. So it wasn't a snug fit and it needed to be snug, otherwise it just wouldn't turn. And so I got some more of the coffee stirring sticks and taped them around the outside of the tube, and then it fitted in snugly and I was happy. Once that was in position, it was time to mix up my resin, and when you're using a cup turner and coating something, you don't need very much resin at all. I'm using EnviroCast resin from Elichem Resins, which is due for release very soon. I was lucky enough to get a chance to try it out before it was released to the public, and I do love it, so keep your eye open for that. And then it was time to put it onto the water feature. I just added a little bit at a time and rubbed it on with my gloved hands. And yeah, once again, the good old gloved hand is the best tool, in my opinion. So once I'd finished applying all of the resin and making sure it was nice and smooth and there were no air bubbles in there, you do need to watch it for a while. But once I'd finished that, I left it to cure while it was turning for about 6 hours, I think, and then it was ready for the next step. So as I mentioned before, this idea did work, but it didn't work perfectly. As I show you it, you'll see how, as the light catches it, that it wasn't a perfectly smooth finish. It had a few lumps and bumps in there where the resin just didn't behave itself. I think it was just the shape of it, really. If it was a cylinder like it's designed for, the cup turner is designed for cylinders, it would have been perfect, but obviously it will start to run down the curved sides, and that's when it starts to go a little bit uneven. But I think it looks great anyway, and that resin really brings out the pattern really beautifully. Right, let's bring the water feature to life. I'm using a bowl that fits in my table perfectly, and I have sprayed it black, mainly around the edges. That's what you're going to see. And I thought the bright silver would show up too much, so I just did a little bit of Rust-Oleum black spray paint. And I've also cut a slot down the side for the wire, because this is a solar fountain. It's connected to a solar panel, which you can't disconnect. Well, you maybe can, but I didn't want to try it. So I needed it to be able to slot in and go under the table rather than going on the top. So I used my Dremel angle grinder to cut that slot in the side of the bowl. I needed something for the sphere to sit on, which the water would go through. So I had to rack my brains on what I would use. And then I remembered that I had this old plastic fruit crate, and I thought, yeah, I could cut a circle out of that and use that. So I made a template, just the right size. I worked out how big it needed to be, drew around it, and then cut it out. And once again, I used my angle grinder tool on my Dremel. I think it's called an angle grinder tool. I don't know. I don't know what half of the tools are called, but it works really well. Okay, after taking it outside to cut it, I was back with my grid ready to put the sphere on. First of all, I needed to put the pump in, and it's got little sucker things on the bottom, so it stuck to the bottom of the bowl. And then I put the grid over that with the, what's it called? The tall bit. Sticking through. Oh, I am good with my technical terms, aren't I? The tall bit sticking through, and then I attached the sphere through onto the pump through that hole. It was a little bit wobbly, but that didn't matter because I had all my stones to go on next, and I could prop it up and make sure it was nice and level with the stones going underneath it a little bit. So yeah, that saved the day. And then it was ready to go and pop it into the table in the garden and see how it would look. And here it is. And doesn't it look good? I think the colour match isn't perfect. I would have preferred the colour to match the stones a bit better, but it's fine. I'm happy with it. And the water that you can see on the table is because I sprayed the stones to, when they're dry, they don't look as good. And I wanted them to match the table for this little bit of video, so I cheated a bit and I sprayed them with my water spray just to wet them to get the full effect. So yeah, the actual fountain hasn't leaked onto the table. The water really stays contained really well, so it's really a success in that respect. I'm really happy with it. So I will put a link to the solar fountain in the video description. However, as you can see, when the sun's not shining, it doesn't work. It stops. So if a cloud goes in front of the sun, the fountain suddenly stops. So that is an issue with solar fountains. They don't, have a backup where they store the energy and it won't keep going like a solar light would, It just works at the time if the sun is shining. But still, I probably wouldn't be sat outside by it if the sun wasn't shining anyway. So yeah, it's fine. Well, we've come to the end of the video, and I really hope you've enjoyed it and it's put you in the mood to try and make your own water feature. Don't forget to give me a thumbs up if you've enjoyed it and subscribe if you haven't already done so. And I will see you again next time. Thank you for watching and bye for now.